Okay, hello, welcome. My name is Raleigh Reichert, and today I will be presenting on advancing One Water New York City. First, I'd like to start by thanking my final briefing team, Nikki and Namir, my entire workshop team, and our faculty advisor, Nancy Degnan. First, I'd like to start with context, presenting the challenges that New York City faces with this water. Then I'll introduce the One Water New York City plan, the guiding questions that our group gathered from that plan, the recommendations that we delivered to our clients, and then finally a synthesis of our work. So first, I'd like to give context. Everybody should be aware that New York City is a city that has an abundance of water. On the left is Hurricane Ida, which struck the city in late 2021, flooding the city and leading to the deaths of 14 residents. The middle image displays sea level rise. As a coastal city, New York City is well aware of the imminent dangers of this. And then finally, the image on the right shows that while everyone in New York City will experience these challenges because of historical discrimination and poverty, some are more vulnerable to the environmental risks. As can be seen in this image, water has taken a toll not only on the health but well-being of the most vulnerable and disadvantaged communities of New York City. These challenges will undoubtedly affect New York City and challenge its role as a global hub of business, trade, and culture. Our client is Alan Cohn, who's the managing director of the Integrated Water Management Division within the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, or DEP. While his specific unit is quite small in terms of employees, they're still charged with the major goals of the DEP, which are to provide clean drinking water, manage wastewater, and reduce pollution for all New York residents. Our client specifically asked us to assess the viability of an integrated water management plan known as One Water New York City. This plan is a holistic vision to the management of New York City's water resources. It has 6 major components, but due to the difficulties to actually actualize, our client has asked us to focus on 2 specific areas, which are equity and affordability and workforce development. The goal of equity and affordability is to balance the needs of these vulnerable communities while also providing customer affordability for water. For workforce development, the goal is to grow and retain a highly qualified and diverse staff to promote sustainable and innovative solutions, thus enhancing professional development and institutional knowledge transfer. From these 2 pillars, our group gleaned 5 major guiding questions. For equity and affordability, our questions are: what communities are most vulnerable and how do we reach them? Second, New York City is not the first city in the US to enact a One Water-like framework. So what have these other cities done and what can we learn from them? And then next, who needs to be engaged in this process from a stakeholder and community outreach standpoint? For workforce development, what is the human infrastructure necessary to successfully enact this plan? And how can we assess the success of this workforce? Our team was then further divided into 3 subgroups. For equity and affordability, we have our data analytics team and our stakeholder analysis team. And then for workforce development, we have straightforwardly and frankly uncreatively our workforce development team. They all worked independently, but at the end, we were able to synthesize all of their work into a final deliverable for our client. I'd like to start with the data analytics team, who is charged with the question of who are these vulnerable communities and how can we find them? Our client came to us and said that, they had a lot of data, but they didn't really know how to access it or probe it or utilize it in a meaningful way. They also specifically asked for a screening tool that was similar to the CDC Social Vulnerability Index, but they just didn't have the internal means to do such. Therefore, our team came up and developed the Equity and Affordability Screening Tool, or acronym EAST, really cool. This tool is a New York City specific community-based vulnerability screening tool and an associated handbook. So what the handbook outlines is, the screening tool itself consists of indicators that include features of equity and affordability while also being specific to DEP function. The handbook outlines the rationale for these indicators, a calculation for an EAST score, which I'll get to next, and then a recommendation for data usage. So the EAST tool incorporates 18 indicators across community and environmental characteristics. Using census tract geography, they were able to construct an EAST score that ranged from 0 to 100, 100 being communities that are most vulnerable to an environmental and social risk. With this tool, our client now has access to a community-based equity and needs screening to, of course, promote or prioritize projects in highly vulnerable areas, and also to use the tool to access funding for disadvantaged communities. The map on the left is a visualization of New York City's 5 boroughs. The darker colors represent a higher EAST score and therefore more vulnerable communities. These predominantly reside in 3 boroughs: the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens. Our stakeholder analysis team was charged with 2 questions. 1, what have other cities done to implement the One Water framework, and what can we learn from them? And 2, who needs to be involved? The stakeholders themselves. So cities across the United States have implemented their own version of One Water, and through secondary research and expert interviews with these cities, our stakeholder team was able to glean the struggles and successes of these cities. With that and further research, they were able to compile something called the Manual for Partnerships, which I will discuss next. The Manual for Partnerships is a guide that outlines the barriers to community and stakeholder engagement. It specifically identifies stakeholders within New York City who are most important in enacting this plan. And then finally, it also holds the DEP accountable to maintaining these long-term relationships. Our clients told us that they understood how important community and stakeholder outreach were, but had struggled historically with making that successful. So therefore, we believe that the Manual for Partnerships will be a useful guide for them to create these long-lasting relationships and meet the goals of One Water New York City. Finally, our workforce development team was charged with 2 major questions. 1, who is needed to actually enact and implement the framework, and how do we identify their success? Our client was upfront and told us that they believed that morale at the DEP was fairly low, and that this was a struggle to both retain talent and recruit new talent. We identified 2 key areas, which were retention and recruitment, to focus on. And furthermore, we provided key performance indicators or KPIs to allow them to address their success. So for the 2 areas that we focus on, which are recruitment and retention, recruitment suggestions include increase the visibility of DEP job postings, as well as implement an equitable hiring strategy and search for hidden talent within the applicant pool. For retention, we really wanted to leverage the collaborative nature of One Water New York City by incorporating other members throughout the DEP to be part of the plan. We thought once employees were engaged with the material, they'd feel connected to it, therefore wanting to stay around and increasing the overall morale. But then further, we provide key performance indicators such as employee turnover rate to allow the DEP to assess its success in this project. I want to end with 4 major recommendations, or like spearheaded recommendations, that our group delivered. First, we'd like the DEP, our client, to share with DEP leadership our deliverables to advance the One Water framework. Second, for EAST, we'd like a pilot study to test it within New York City. And then for stakeholder, we want them to immediately implement a internal steering committee to enact the initial steps of the Manual for Partnership, which includes creating a timeline. And then for workforce development, to enact a pilot study for in a small group to look at recruitment and retention and use the KPIs for success. From the analytical power of our EAST tool to the meaningful and actionable recommendations of stakeholder and workforce development, we believe that we've delivered to our client a comprehensive and interdependent package that will promote sustainable and equitable water delivery system for generations of New York residents. With that, I will take any questions. Thank you so much.
Hi, great presentation, Riley. I'm wondering about the EAST tool. I know you said that you kind of looked specifically at how social vulnerability might play into DEP's goals specifically. Does that mean that you were looking at like flood risk and utility debt, or can you speak to a little more of those characteristics that you looked at?
Yeah, I could do this one, Cassidy. Yes, if we had more time, I would love to show you all 18 of those indicators, but they do include things ranging from unemployment rate to proximity to Superfund site. Flooding risk was definitely something we considered. Some of this data is really difficult to get your hands on. And so this is still a beta tool. And this is where the handbook comes in, because we very explicitly outline, all right, here's what we currently have. This is what you should do next to develop this tool to make it more robust. Yeah.
Great presentation, Raleigh. I also had a question on the EAST framework. So I was curious how you guys prioritized or came up with any kind of, or if you came up with any kind of weighting mechanism for the map that you created showing kind of the scale of vulnerability. Yes, of the 18 factors that you have, how do you determine kind of how they intersect and which ones may be more important in some areas and less important in others?
I mostly know this answer, but I'm going to let Cassidy answer it.
Yeah, so of the 18, they're not exactly weighted one-to-one. So we have a 50-50 community characteristics, and which includes socioeconomic indicators, demographic indicators, and also affordability data from internal DEP data. And then also the other 50% is environmental risk. So that includes sea level rise, water quality issues, all of that. So that's a 50-50%. But in our manual, there are some recommendations that we keep the 50-50, but if DEP ultimately decides to change the weighting, then they might have their own decisions for that.